Hi, this is Scott Knowles. I'm a historian of disasters at the Korea Advanced Institute of Science and Technology, and I'm the host of the program COVID Calls. COVID Calls is a live broadcast that I host every weekday. I started COVID Calls on March 16th, 2020, with my first guest, Dr. Gigi Granval, who's a senior scholar at the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security. Just the week before I started, Drexel University, my former employer, had begun the process of closing down. And many people will remember from March of 2020, certainly if they were in the United States, that was around the week that all of our normal lives really ceased to function as they had before. Over that weekend after Drexel closed, I decided that I would do what I normally do, which is to start calling around and ask some experts what they thought of the pandemic, hence the name COVID Calls. I first had the idea for making a sort of a podcast about disasters or a real-time historical record actually back in 2017. You may recall that fall hurricane season in the Gulf of Mexico. It was an extraordinary and terrible one. And my parents, actually, who had only recently moved to the coast of Texas, lost their house. So their house was badly damaged in Hurricane Harvey, which made landfall very close to their home. And of course, that terrible storm then went on to set rainfall records in Houston and in Port Arthur, Texas. I thought at that time, I remember thinking at that time, with those three hurricanes, and particularly through the fall, that I wished I had made a record of that time, because the news was moving so quickly and it was all happening against a background of tremendous unrest in United States politics. But I think that was in the back of my mind when classes shut down, the university shut down over that weekend leading up to March 16th of last year. It's also part of my method. Doing historical archival work is what I'm trained to do, but I always find that work is better guided by practitioner interviews. That if I'm working on a topic, or I'm looking at disaster history, that by talking about disaster experts, and I mean that term very broadly, practitioners, engineers, people in the health fields, the health sciences, elected officials, institutional leaders, creative folks, people in the arts, whoever it may be who has some expertise, if they're willing to take my call. I've always found those calls and those meetings, back when we did such things, to be really helpful roadmap back into the archives. Maybe it's a reverse engineering of an archival strategy. So I've always used this method as a way to think about my historical work. Also, really part of my conviction that we need much stronger relationships among disaster researchers and also between disaster researchers and the media. And so COVID Calls is still intended as a venue to facilitate such discussion and such finding, so that people who work on similar types of problems, but who might be coming from very different disciplines or from outside academia, pairing with people who are inside academia, we need to build those relationships, and it's hard to build them in the middle of a disaster, or at least the normal kind of disaster that we're used to. But a pandemic has a very strange temporal flow. This is a slow disaster. And so there has been an opportunity to build relationships, I think really important research relationships, human relationships across those boundaries. I'm also interested in trying to facilitate relationship building between journalists, working journalists, and disaster experts. Journalists working on deadline, particularly covering disaster stories, there's almost no room for error for them. They have to find their sources, they have to find them quickly. If they don't have pre-existing relationships with disaster researchers, then I think that they're under such pressure, they often will turn to the people that they already know. And that means that over the years, there's been a tried and true group of disaster experts who've been called to talk in the middle of disaster, and that's appropriate, and those people are brilliant, and we all know who they are. And I think we also should have a much bigger pool, because the depth of talent out there is just really, really important to acknowledge, and the variety of voices is really important too. Bringing more diversity to the group of experts who can comment about what disasters mean, what their histories are, what they portend in the present and for the future. I think that diversification is long overdue. And so that's been one of the goals of COVID calls as well. So in this intervening year, I've been really honored to speak with disaster social scientists and historians, health professionals and scientists, even elected officials and artists from around the world. On October 16th, my 150th episode, I actually got a chance to talk to my brothers and sisters on COVID calls. All but one of my brothers was able to make the call. This is one of my very favorite episodes. And I think hopefully it was an opportunity to share some insight about family relationships amidst a pandemic, something we've all thought about a lot in this last year. And also, quite selfishly, it was an opportunity just to see my brothers and sisters and talk to them when we could all be together for an hour. I'm going to show a clip from that episode now, and then I'll come back and say a few more words about the special 1-year anniversary episode, which is coming up on March 16th.
Government's not going to tell me what to do, and that has been from the beginning. Like, I remember going to pick up my son from staying with his in-laws during the day because our house was too small to be taking care of 2 parents working at home and a almost 2-year-old. So like we go out there and masks, nah, we're not social distance. Nope, not going to do that either. Like, no, seriously, this is serious. Like, I realize you're a quote unquote rural community, but like, you can still get it. So,
yeah.
Dave, since I want to just actually, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. This is a mask. This is one that I have. Since I studied disasters, I keep tabs on things. I bought some masks in early January because I was following what was going on in China. I guess it would have been around mid-January. And I don't know if you remember this. So like, I talked to the way things were pre-COVID time. I would talk to each of you or text with each of you, usually in the morning on my Amtrak trip in to Drexel, or in the evening on my walk from the train station home. Like, those are time periods in which that's like sibling time for me to catch up with people, which means you're all sort of used to receiving sort of rando texts from me somewhere between 7:30 in the morning and 8:30 in the morning and 6 and 8 p.m. or like a random call where I sound out of breath because I'm walking. This particular morning was early March, and I had the mask on the train, and people were just starting to wear them here in the Northeast right at that time. The first death recorded of COVID was in New York, was March 1st. In Jersey, people were not in general wearing any masks, and I wore this. There was one other person on the train. I'll never forget this. And I talked to you, Dave, and we were talking on the phone, and I said, "Oh, I'm wearing the mask." And you said, "Oh, you're not supposed to wear that." You totally let me have it. You were like, "You're not supposed to wear the mask. The masks, other people need the masks, the mask, they've already told you were." And of course, this is what the CDC was reporting at that time, was we weren't supposed to wear the mask.
You're damn right they were.
And yeah, okay. So that's a separate issue. This is a brothers and sisters thing. And the point I want to make about this is that, okay, so first of all, I could have got this information anywhere I wanted, but you know what I did? I took the mask off and I put it in my bag. And I didn't wear a mask again until much later, because you chastised me for wearing the mask. And I want to just make that point, because I think that we rely a lot on each other maybe sometimes in unhealthy ways.
Yeah, sorry about that.
For public health information. No, that's the information that was out there. And in fact, you could say because we had a PPE shortage in this country, I had already bought this before that shortage. But I have come back to that moment time and time again. I was sort of like, I think in some way I wanted you to say like, hey, great, cool mask and good job. And instead you're like, hey, idiot, like you're not supposed to be wearing the mask. And I was like, I just remember very sheepishly, I was like putting it in my bag, and that was that for the mask.
But it's funny, you had no shame wearing it.
Not me in the least, a bunch of strangers. But if my brother 1,800 miles away tells me not to do it,
Hey,
yes.
That's it.
It's about, I think one of the frustrating aspects about me dealing with this entire thing personally has been like, and as you guys know, I feel like I'm very much a rule follower, and like that I'm presented with that, and I was like, oh, well, that's the rule. I'm going to follow the rule. And then the rule changed, and I was like, we got to get masks now. Like, we need masks now. And I was like,
I remember the first time my husband came downstairs with like a bandana around his face because he was going to go to the store. And I was like, no, they say not to wear masks. Like they say that it's no good. And then he's like, no, they changed it. I was like, what? So,
yeah, right.
Yeah.
I count on my wife. She knows she buys all the masks. And I remember in February, I was riding the bus to work, and I saw somebody with a full respirator on the bus. And I was kind of like, look at this guy over here. And then that guy was wise up. He knew. So now it's like in hindsight, I didn't.
Yeah, it's a good thing he didn't call his brother.
Yeah.
Let's stay with this for a minute. We are sort of an extended phone, text, social media tree as siblings. What are some of the other ways we were all communicating throughout all of this?
Well, we started our weekly Zoom calls.
Yeah, we started at the end of March.
Was it that early?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, it was right after Granddad passed, and so we called each other. We wanted to Zoom, and it just became a weekly thing, which is really special. And
Not
we're still
weekly
doing
now,
it.
but because we've all gotten busier, but I think it's still been a constant, which has been nice. It's like we talk to y'all and see y'all's faces much more than I had in years.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. We typically don't see each other between April and October. I mean, sometimes if we're lucky, a summer vacation, we all get together. But, it's not like, I think this upcoming, Christmas break and like not getting to see each other over the winter is going to be really tough. But I just love that we've seen each other and talked to each other more in the past 7 months than we typically do. And it's, for a while there, it was every either Saturday or Sunday for at least an hour. And it was like the highlight of the week. It was the only thing that would break up for me or for our family. It was the only thing that we had on the calendar that was.
So just showing a brief clip there from the October 16th, 2020 COVID calls. That was my 150th episode, and I shared that one with my brothers and sisters, and it was a much needed visit with them. And in fact, even just sharing that 5 minutes of it with you now, I realize how distant I still feel from them, and was really pleased to share that. We'll have many more clips to show in the 1-year anniversary episode, and that's what I'm doing right now, just offering a brief preview and just to remind you that COVID Calls is broadcast every weekday to discuss the pandemic and historical perspective, also talking with practitioners and also discussing the path ahead as we try to bring some depth of knowledge and caring to understanding this pandemic. And so just a reminder that on Tuesday, March 16th, I will mark the 1-year anniversary of hosting COVID Calls. It's been an honor to do this work, and it's created a community that I'm humbled to be one part of. We've done 238 episodes, and so I've had over 300 guests, people who have given their time and their expertise to this project. And it started as a daily broadcast, literally just to try to surface good ideas in disaster research and to connect researchers to each other and connect researchers to journalists. But of course, over time and over the various different acts of this pandemic, from racial injustice in the late spring through the summer of last year, the struggles of getting back to school, the fall resurgence of cases, the search for the vaccine and vaccination, as well as the, of course, constant drumbeat of political madness that was the United States last year. COVID Calls tried to engage with experts across many different fields and areas of work, including artists as well, high school students, working journalists, and people like myself, historians, to gather in conversation and in solidarity. In every COVID Calls episode, I read the daily statistics, but of course, acknowledging the limitations of those death statistics, I also read an obituary in every session as well. And I've been honored to host many families of victims, many activists, people who are actively pushing for COVID justice, including Alex Goldstein, including Kristen Urquiza, and many others. And so I'll show some clips from some of those episodes in the 1-year anniversary that I'll be holding on Tuesday as well. I'd like to just remind you also, you can always offer suggestions for COVID Calls. And if you have suggestions for particular episodes that you'd like me to show a clip from, that you'd like to hear some backstory of and some discussion, please feel free to send me a note and let me know about that before Tuesday's broadcast. At this point, COVID Calls is also making an archive. It's an archive, of course, filtered through my own process of setting an agenda for what I think I'd like to know, what I think is important to bring into conversation, and what I think will be important as historians and policymakers, let's hope policymakers, and others look back on this time in the near future, but also in the distant future as well. And mine is just one of many, many archival projects which are happening. It's one of the most creative aspects, I think, trying to cope with this pandemic, is the degree to which humanists and social scientists have risen to this moment to really work on archives in the moment. And so we'll discuss that as well. So I hope you will join me on Tuesday, March 16th at 5:30 p.m. That's a new time for COVID Calls, 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time this Tuesday. And I will look forward to speaking with you all then, and stay healthy. And I'll see you then. Thanks.